Daniel and his friends had a tradition. Every summer, they ventured far from the bustle of city life to camp in remote forests. This year, they chose Black Hollow Forest, a place cloaked in local legend and whispered warnings. Locals spoke in hushed tones about campers who vanished beneath the gnarled boughs and about a presence that lurked among the ancient trees. Still, the group, emboldened by youth and a desire for adventure, laughed off the cautionary tales. When Daniel, Jess, Eric, Mark, and Lisa arrived at the forest's edge, the atmosphere immediately changed. The forest was unnervingly silent. The usual chirps of crickets and rustling of leaves were absent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. They found a clearing surrounded by towering, twisted pines whose limbs reached out like skeletal arms. They set up camp and lit a fire, the flames dancing in contrast to the inky darkness beyond their circle. As night deepened, they sat around the fire sharing stories. Jess, always the skeptic, mocked the ghost stories, while Eric exaggerated tales of spirits and cursed grounds. Yet beneath the laughter, an undercurrent of unease began to creep in. In the distance, the wind carried an odd metallic scent that none could place. Daniel noticed that the shadows between the trees seemed to pulse and shift with a life of their own. Around midnight, as the fire's glow began to fade, the group heard soft footsteps circling their tents. At first, they assumed it was a curious animal, but the sound was too measured, too deliberate. Daniel, with his heart pounding, crept out of his tent with only a flashlight. The beam swept over the dense underbrush and towering trunks, but nothing revealed itself, only the impression that unseen eyes were watching. The next morning, the friends discovered something unsettling. Carved into the bark of several trees around the campsite were strange symbols, jagged, spiraling shapes that seemed to tell a cryptic story. Jess dismissed them as the handiwork of local pranksters, though her hands trembled as she reached out to trace one of the markings. That afternoon, a palpable tension gripped the group. They debated leaving immediately, but pride and the hope that it was merely a prank held them back. As dusk approached, the forest grew darker, more oppressive, and the silence became a heavy, living presence. As the fire was lit once more that evening, the whispers started. At first, they were indistinct, a murmur here, a rustle there, but gradually the whispers grew into clear, almost pleading words. Leave while you can. The voice was not one person's. It seemed to echo from the very trees themselves. Daniel's skin prickled as he exchanged worried glances with his friends. In the midst of this, Eric volunteered to check the perimeter, insisting that he'd find nothing but wildlife. Moments later, a scream shattered the uneasy calm. Eric had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only his abandoned flashlight and the echo of his desperate cry. The group's panic escalated. They searched desperately in the dark, calling out for Eric until the forest swallowed their voices. In the confusion, Mark disappeared next. One moment he was sharing a laugh with Daniel, and the next his flashlight lay on the damp ground, its beam feebly illuminating nothing but disturbed soil. Daniel and Jess attempted to lead the remaining survivors. Mark had been with them moments before his disappearance, and Lisa, paralyzed with fear, through what they believed was the safe path. But the forest, as if alive and intent on trapping them, seemed to shift. The familiar trail vanished and was replaced by an unending maze of twisted trees and tangled undergrowth. In the darkness, the whispers turned into taunting laughter that echoed among the trunks. Daniel felt as though the forest itself were mocking their terror. Every rustle, every crack of a branch, set his heart racing. Suddenly, a towering figure materialized in the distance. It was enormous, its limbs contorted and elongated, and its face was a void, a hollow mask of darkness with eyes that glimmered like distant stars. Jess's scream cut through the oppressive night as the figure advanced, and then everything turned to chaos. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears as he and Lisa ran blindly, branches clawing at their skin. The forest, now an ever-changing labyrinth, refused to let them escape. At times, they would come upon open clearings only to be plunged back into the claustrophobic darkness moments later. After what seemed like hours of endless terror, Daniel suddenly burst out onto a busy highway. The bright, indifferent light of dawn revealed nothing but an empty field beyond the roadside. Panting, he looked back, expecting to see the looming mass of Black Hollow Forest, but it was gone. Only the memories of whispering voices and shifting shadows remained. As he staggered toward help, the wind carried one final spectral message: "See you next summer." Daniel's mind reeled with the horror of that night. He had lost friends, had been pursued by something ancient and malevolent, and now carried a burden of memories too terrible to share. To this day, the mystery of Black Hollow Forest haunts him, a nightmare that blurs the line between myth and reality. Michael had spent years dreaming of a home that was truly his, a sanctuary that promised solitude and beauty. When he discovered a sprawling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of a sleepy town, listed at a price that defied logic, he didn't hesitate. The real estate agent, with a nervous glint in her eyes, emphasized one peculiar detail before the sale was finalized. Just never go into the basement. At first glance, the mansion was a treasure. Grand staircases, intricate woodwork, and expansive, echoing rooms spoke of an era long past. Michael reveled in the solitude and the sense of history embedded in every stone and beam. The first few nights passed in a quiet routine of exploration. Dusty corridors, forgotten libraries, and hidden alcoves that sparked his curiosity. But soon, the mansion began to reveal its darker side. Late one evening, while Michael was poring over old ledgers in the library, he heard a soft murmur drifting from behind a closed door. At first, he assumed it was just the wind through the cracks. Yet, the sound grew steadily louder, a blend of sighs and distant voices calling his name in a tone both seductive and sorrowful. Unable to shake the compulsion, Michael followed the whispers to the basement door, a heavy oak door with iron fittings that seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. With trembling hands, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. A cold draft hit him, carrying the scent of decay and forgotten secrets. A narrow staircase led downward into complete darkness. He descended slowly, each step echoing in the silence. At the bottom, his flashlight beam revealed a vast, subterranean chamber that defied the mansion's modest exterior. The walls were lined with rows of faded portraits, somber faces that appeared to watch him with a mixture of longing and despair. Each portrait was meticulously detailed, showing residents of the mansion from centuries past. Beneath each image, a name was inscribed in delicate, almost illegible script. Michael's heart pounded when he reached a portrait that was different. The face was blurred, as if scratched out by time, and the name below it was his, newly added, as fresh as the night itself. A chill seized him. The air grew thick, and in the silence, a voice, soft, sinister, and echoing, spoke directly into his mind. You belong to the house now." In that instant, the mansion transformed. Michael's senses betrayed him as doors slammed shut on their own. Hallways twisted into endless corridors that defied logic. The portraits seemed to animate, their eyes following his every move. He stumbled back up the stairs, but the architecture was no longer familiar. The mansion had become a labyrinth of shifting rooms and dark passages. Desperate and disoriented, Michael tried to call for help, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. Shadows moved at the corners of his vision, and spectral figures drifted silently in the gloom. Their eyes were vacant, yet filled with sorrow and accusation. Michael's mind raced with questions. What was this place, and why had it chosen him? As the hours wore on, reality blurred. Michael heard the echo of past residents' voices, recounting tales of love, loss, and madness. In hushed tones, they recounted how the mansion had claimed them one by one, trapping their souls within its walls. He began to see fleeting images of a past life, a young woman pleading at a window, a man desperately writing a farewell note, all set against a backdrop of despair. Finally, as the first hints of dawn filtered weakly through grimy windows, Michael found himself before the front door. It swung open slowly, as if inviting him to leave, yet the mansion whispered a final, gut-wrenching promise. "Your soul is ours forever." Michael escaped that day, but the mansion never truly let him go. Every night, in moments of quiet terror, he hears its call. The spectral voices and shifting corridors haunt his dreams, a constant reminder that some homes never relinquish those who dare to call them their own. Greg had spent countless nights driving his taxi through the city's neon-lit streets, a silent observer of its underbelly. But nothing could prepare him for the fateful stormy night when a peculiar passenger turned his world upside down. It was past midnight when Greg first saw her, a solitary figure standing beneath a flickering streetlight on a deserted road at the edge of town. Her long, soaked dress clung to her pale frame as the rain hammered the pavement. Greg pulled over, feeling an inexplicable tug of apprehension, yet also a strange compulsion to help. When she climbed into the back seat, a shiver ran down his spine. Her eyes, barely visible beneath a heavy hood, held a depth of sorrow that seemed to beckon him into darkness. In a barely audible voice, she gave him an address far from the familiar cityscape, a remote area shrouded by dense woods and silence. As they drove, the storm intensified. Rain blurred the world outside, reducing it to a smear of dark colors and fleeting shapes. Greg tried to make casual conversation, but the woman's responses were cryptic and sparse. Every so often, she would murmur something in a tone that sounded both familiar and otherworldly. While navigating a particularly desolate stretch of road, Greg glanced in the rearview mirror, and his blood turned to ice. Where she should have been, there was nothing. At first, he assumed it was a trick of the rain or his own weariness. But when he looked again, the seat was empty. Panic began to set in as he called out, "Ma'am, are you there?" Silence answered him, thick and foreboding. Greg's hands tightened on the wheel as he tried to steady his racing heart. The GPS began to malfunction, the screen flickering with static and garbled symbols. A feeling of being watched gnawed at him. Then, as if drawn by a magnetic force, the woman reappeared in his peripheral vision. But now her features had transformed. Her eyes were no longer the soft, sorrowful kind he had first seen. They were hollow voids, and her face had contorted into a silent scream of anguish. Her voice, now layered with an eerie echo, whispered, You took the wrong road. We're almost home." Greg's mind spun as he tried to comprehend what he was witnessing. He attempted to pull over, but the taxi careened uncontrollably. Rain pounded the windows, and thunder shook the vehicle as the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. In a final moment of terror, he felt a cold, skeletal hand grasp his throat. His vision dimmed, and the dashcam recorded nothing but a burst of static before going dark. Aftermath and unanswered questions. The next morning, Greg's taxi was discovered abandoned on a desolate country road. Investigators found no sign of the mysterious passenger, only the dashcam footage, which ended with a faint, almost inaudible whisper. "Your turn." The event left Greg scarred and haunted by unanswered questions. In the quiet moments after midnight, he sometimes hears the echo of that voice in his dreams and sees a pale, hooded figure lurking at the edge of his vision. For Greg, the line between the mundane and the supernatural had been irrevocably blurred, leaving him to wonder if some passengers are more than they seem. Ethan had always cherished the safety of his quiet suburban home. Nestled in a tidy neighborhood with manicured lawns and friendly neighbors, his existence had been predictable, until one fateful storm-racked night shattered that calm forever. It was just past midnight. Rain pounded relentlessly against the windows, and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. In the midst of this tempest, a soft, hesitant knock echoed at Ethan's front door. At first, he dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on his ears. But as the knock repeated, growing in intensity and urgency, a chill crawled over him. Ethan peered through the peephole, straining to see through the driving rain. The dark, empty porch revealed nothing but the swirling shadows. Just as he was about to dismiss it entirely, his phone buzzed with an incoming message from his neighbor. "Do not open your door. It's not human." The words sent a jolt of terror through him. His hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. The knocking resumed, this time accompanied by a voice that was unnervingly hollow. "Let me in." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he retreated into the safety of his living room. The door's lock rattled on its own, as if invisible fingers were testing its strength. Shadows began to pool at the base of the door, stretching and twisting into grotesque forms that defied logic. The sound of the knocking merged with the howling wind, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm that seemed to beat in time with Ethan's own heartbeat. Desperate to understand what was happening, Ethan reached for his phone and dialed a friend. His voice was shaky as he explained the situation, but the line went dead. No matter how many times he tried, he could not reconnect. The isolation of the moment pressed down on him, and the knocking continued relentlessly. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pounding stopped. A heavy silence fell over the house. Ethan's eyes darted to the door, where he noticed deep claw marks scorched into the wood as if something had slashed it from the outside. Etched into the damaged surface, barely visible beneath the dripping rain, were the chilling words, "I'll come back when you're alone." In the days that followed, Ethan's life was transformed by dread. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind against the windows, seemed to carry echoes of that fateful night. He installed cameras and changed his locks, yet the unsettling presence lingered. Neighbors whispered of strange figures seen near his home, and the local police dismissed his reports as overactive imagination. But Ethan knew what he had experienced. Late at night, when the world was quiet and his mind began to wander back to that terrifying storm, he'd hear a faint knock or catch a glimpse of a shadow where none should be. The fear of that unknown visitor, the relentless promise of return, haunted him relentlessly. Ethan was left wondering if the knock was merely an omen, or if some force had marked him for something far darker than he could ever imagine. If you made it this far, maybe you weren't as scared as you thought. Or maybe you just liked the feeling of something watching you. Either way, if you enjoyed this, leave a like. It helps more than you think. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Silent Terror and turn on notifications.